Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Roger Polack of Racine is a Democratic candidate in the 1st Congressional District. Roger, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Hey, Steve. Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'm just intrigued. A big part of American, the debate right now is on American foreign policy, and you have a unique perspective. You were in Afghanistan for 20 months as a civilian intelligence analyst. So I'm curious. It's part of our American debate. What should the future involvement in America be in that troubled, war-torn country?
Hey, yeah, thank you for that question. You know, the quote-unquote peace agreement that the Trump administration has signed with the Taliban, I think is going to prove ineffective, and we've already seen that with violence between the Taliban and Afghan forces and U.S. forces. And part of the failure in that agreement is bringing the Afghan government to the table. There's no way that peace is going to be achieved in Afghanistan with a bilateral agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban that keeps the Afghan government out of it. So I think we need to work on bringing all sides to the table. And, you know, I am for reducing our presence substantially in the country. I was there, as you said, for 20 months, and I know the sacrifices that our men and women in uniform who I served shoulder to shoulder with have made there, and the amount of U.S. tax dollars that have been spent. And we have given the Afghan government substantial space to prove that they can lead. And there is a point, and I think we've crossed that, where there needs to be a review of our presence there and a drawdown. And so, you know, I am, like I said, I'm for the process of trying to achieve peace, but I just think it's, you know, relying on the Taliban to agree to stop hostilities is not going to work. It's shown that, and they're simply going to wait out the terms of the agreement and you know, try to take over the country. So again, I think a solution is bringing both sides to the table, working through a legitimate process that encompasses everybody.
Well, I just wanted to go there because of your unique experience there. But first question, what do you consider the number one issue in your campaign?
You know, bringing down the cost of healthcare and making sure that everyone has access to affordable healthcare coverage. And this pandemic has really brought that to light, and the fact that, you know, we need to have a system in place where everyone has access to affordable healthcare and low cost prescription drugs. And, you know, I grew up in a family that struggled tremendously financially. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads while my dad dealt with severe mental health issues. And I know paying the bills were a huge issue in my family. And that was a constant source of anxiety. And so, you know, it's hugely important to me that we focus on having a safety net for all individuals, and that there is a healthcare policy in place in this country where whoever wants to elect into a government-run plan has that ability and isn't trying to make decisions about should they take on this procedure or go bankrupt. I think that you know, in this country in 2020, the fact that families are facing that decision is immoral and needs to be corrected. And I believe that healthcare is a complete human right.
Well, as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court just agreed to hear the appeal on whether Obamacare should be ruled unconstitutional. So I guess my question is, if the Supreme Court found Obamacare to be unconstitutional, would you then, as a member of Congress, the next step be to push for a universal healthcare plan or system?
You know, in my opinion, we need to be building on the Affordable Care Act and not replacing it. For me, that means eliminating surprise billing, driving down the cost of prescription drugs, and always protecting coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. If the ACA were to be repealed right now, 224,000 Wisconsinites would lose their health care. And to strip thousands of people of their health insurance during a pandemic, in my view, is just frankly cruel and unacceptable. And we've heard for years that the Republican Party, including Brian Style, the incumbent here, has a replacement, but haven't seen it. And, in my view, Democrats have come up with the Affordable Care Act, and it's not incumbent upon us to come up with a plan to replace it. And again, I think we should be building on the Affordable Care Act and not replacing it.
Okay, understand. The unusual pandemic, the COVID-19, should there be a third or fourth package of relief? And if so, who should that relief target? And should the exploding federal deficit be part of this conversation, Roger?
I will say, first off, when the House voted on the first coronavirus relief package, my Republican opponent, Brian Style, voted against it. And, working people are hurting right now. And so I do believe it is important to pass another relief package so that families can get the help that they need. Brian Style claimed that he voted against the bill because it hurts small businesses. But look at where small businesses are right now. They're in a place where they can't get any help. And we need to make sure that relief money is getting to working families and small businesses, really not the large corporations that Brian Style consistently looks out for to the detriment of working families. I think we also need to have greater transparency and accountability about where this coronavirus relief money is going. Brian Style, again, voted no on a bill that would create a special committee in Congress armed with subpoena power to oversee the Trump administration's distribution of coronavirus relief funding. And, in my view, he has consistently failed the people of southeastern Wisconsin, and how he's dealt with the coronavirus relief funding is yet another example of that.
Do we set aside for now the debate over the exploding federal debt just to focus on the need to immediately help people who are being hurt by the pandemic?
In my view, we do. Yeah.
Okay. Senator Mitch McConnell says any new pandemic package would have to include immunity from lawsuits for healthcare providers and businesses. Good idea? Bad idea?
I'll first say that protecting our healthcare workers is a huge priority, and the sacrifices that they've made throughout the pandemic have been tremendous, really. They're the frontline workers and have, the death toll in this country is unexcusably high. It didn't need to be that way, and really shows that leadership matters in this country, and that we need to believe in science and get out in front of issues. And if the Trump administration had paid closer attention to the warnings of leading scientists earlier, and Brian Style again had pushed the Trump administration to the extent that he could, I think it's very clear that less people would have died. But as it relates to your question, I'm open to hearing from all sides on the issue, but we do, of course, have laws on the books for malpractice as it already relates, and I'm just not sure we need a special set of rules to address this specific circumstances. Again, above all, we have to listen to scientists and experts, and not the president's uninformed tweets on how to treat people dealing with the coronavirus.
Okay, looking at your campaign info up on the internet, you promised to not take a dime from corporate PACs or special interests. How can you be a viable candidate when you're running against an incumbent who's much better funded?
Thank you for that question. In the first quarter of this year, we outraised Brian Style in individual contributions, and we are running a completely grassroots campaign. And I feel confident that we're going to have the resources that it takes to bring it to him. And in 2018, we saw a number of candidates, and specifically candidates that have a national security background like mine, win in districts that have been said are difficult to win in. It happened in New Jersey, Michigan, and Virginia. And, candidates like that have also eschewed corporate PAC contributions. And so, I believe that we're running the type of campaign we need to, and we're going to have the resources that we need to defeat Brian Style.
Americans know a lot more than they did 2 months ago about how some police treat those in their custody. Are you in favor of a national police reform act? The House has passed one. Republican Senator Tim Scott, the only black African-American GOP senator, has been working on one. Do you favor a national reform bill? And if so, what should be in it, sir?
Thank you. I do believe that police reform is needed and that there is certainly a place at the federal level. And I was happy to see the House pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, and the provisions in there that I think are important, amongst others, are including provisions to hold police more accountable for misconduct, while also creating a national use of force database, banning chokeholds, and allowing the U.S. Department of Justice to initiate investigations. This is really something that we need to ensure communities of color feel safe, and that means improving police accountability. And, in my view, as with his response to the coronavirus, Brian Style, again, has let down the people of southeastern Wisconsin, voting against greater accountability to a system that needs improvement. And in his response, he said that we don't need a federalization of the police force. And of course not. And that's not what the bill achieves. It's additional safeguards and oversight. And no one's talking about federalizing the police force. And making that argument is kicking the can and an excuse that doesn't hold water.
The U.S. Supreme Court recently ruled that maybe the president can abolish DACA, but his attempt to do so, he didn't do it correctly. He's vowed to, again, try to abolish DACA. What should be the future of those brought to this country as children?
I believe that immigrants are one of the backbones of our country, and studies have shown repeatedly that immigrants are twice as likely to start a business as someone born here, and immigrant-run businesses employ a tenth of the U.S. labor force. And so we absolutely need immigration reform. It has to be moral and fair, and we have to create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and dreamers. I think we need to do a number of things. We need to reform the visa program for guest workers. We need to increase refugee cap for resettlement in the United States, and that goes to this moral and fair aspect of this. We do, of course, also, I believe, have to invest in border security in ways that are much smarter than building a wall and diverting resources to a failed solution, a quote-unquote solution. This includes, high-tech efforts to increase cameras and other surveillance equipment, fencing, increasing the security personnel at the border, and making improvements to port of entry to keep out drugs and human trafficking.
Well, let's talk about climate change. How severe a threat to the nation, to the world? What should be the next steps that America takes on that issue?
Thank you. I believe that climate change is a severe and frankly, an imminent threat to our country. I live in a district that borders Lake Michigan, and I know how important it is to preserve our national heritage, the beauty that's here in our national parks and things like the lake. And I will champion legislation that limits the effects of climate change. And I think things like having renewable energy standards and strengthening the EPA after this administration has weakened it, put in legislative safeguards and minimum standards that prevent going below a certain threshold for the Environmental Protection Agency is extremely important. And so those are the things that I would be looking to do. But yes, I absolutely believe that climate change is severe and it's imminent, and anyone who says otherwise is just not paying attention to the facts and has an agenda behind their talking point.
Let's elaborate a little bit more on your professional background. When you say that you worked for years as a civilian intelligence officer, what expertise did that give you that qualifies you to be the next congressman from the 1st District, Roger?
Thank you for that question. So my first job in the intelligence community was working to stop funding to terrorist organizations in Southeast Asia. After the 9/11 attacks, U.S. Congress recommended establishing a unit within the intelligence community that sits inside the Treasury Department, focusing solely on the funding of terrorism. And so out of college, I was recruited to join that because of my Southeast Asia expertise. I speak Thai and studied Burmese and lived there for a year and a half. And so when I first joined this group, I was focused on terrorist organizations in Asia and working to stop the flow of funding from the Gulf to these organizations. I then worked on, when the surge in Afghanistan happened in 2009, I began studying and analyzing the amount of money that the Taliban was receiving from the narcotics trade. And I ended up deploying to Afghanistan first as an intelligence analyst, and in that capacity, I sat face to face with Taliban detainees, helped plan operations, wrote presidential daily briefings for the president on the situation in Afghanistan and the Taliban sources of funding, and how to cut those off. I went down to some of the most hot, in terms of the pace of the war areas in the country, and briefed battle space commanders on our belief on how we can affect change in terms of Taliban financing. I then took over as the intelligence director of this organization and continued that work at a higher level, directing the intelligence priorities of the 65-person unit, which was made up of Marines, Air Force, even that National Guard, and Army, and civilian intelligence analysts. And we work closely with the DEA to target funding going to the Taliban from the narcotics trade, shutting down institutions that were moving money for the Taliban, and also working on corruption initiatives. We uncovered some of the most major fraud in Afghanistan and revealed how that connects to the Afghan government. So I've got a deep expertise in intelligence, and looking at this most recent scandal with travesty, really, with Donald Trump, knowing that the Russians were paying to attack U.S. forces in Afghanistan. I mean, that's the similar analysis that I had done of following the money and seeing where it's going. And so, as a member of Congress, I'll be in a position to evaluate the administration. And I pray that ends up being Joe Biden, and we'll be working hard to make that happen. But evaluating, the things coming out of the administration and testing it in terms of, how that stacks with general intelligence methods.
So there's no doubt.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's no doubt in your mind then that that Mr. Putin put a bounty on American soldiers, the killing of American soldiers?
We have a saying, in the work that I did, follow the money, right? FTM. And you look at the flow of funds, it seems very clear, looking at the financial transactions, that money was transferred into individuals' accounts who then moved that through the Afghan informal, called the Hawala system, for informal banking system, to attack U.S. troops. So yeah, I mean, money, the flow of funds does not lie, and I think that's pretty clear.
Just one more question.
And reprehensible that action has not been taken by our government on that note.
What action should America consider to punish Mr. Putin for putting a bounty on American GIs?
Another thing that I did in government is Sanction Policy. I developed policies to go after targets throughout the world using U.S. economic sanctions, and I've worked on drafting some of the executive order language on those and the regulations. So there are a tremendous number of things that the U.S. government could do to ratchet up sanctions that we already have in place on Russia and make them hurt economically for it. That's one very low-hanging fruit that the administration could do, that Congress could still do, that Brian Stile could put in place or propose, and we've seen no action on that front.
Just one more question on this subject. Given your work against terrorism, how much safer is America today than after 9/11?
In terms of the threat from terrorist organizations, I think we're tremendously safer. The men and women who work in the intelligence community and law enforcement around the country that are focused on stopping terrorism are tremendously professional. They're pretty well resourced, and while I was in that role of, every day, there's tremendous amounts of intelligence coming from the CIA, from NSA, from the State Department, from the U.S. government, or from the U.S. military rather, and all of that information is being synthesized by hardworking civilian analysts and detecting threats and getting ahead of those. So I do believe that our nation is much safer, and we have tremendous counterterrorism relationships with a number of allies. including in the region where they emanate. So always have to stay vigilant, and my insight into how the Trump administration has been handling counterterrorism is limited. I held a top secret clearance with a number of high level caveats and other access to information, and viewed some of the most sensitive information that our country has. And so I know what the threat is, and I also know what the U.S. government can do to stop it.
Okay. It's one thing to be a resident of the 1st District. It's another to be the U.S. House member from the 1st District. What have you learned about the 1st District since you announced your candidacy, and what's the biggest need in the 1st District, Roger?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been proud to see is the level of activism here and the individuals that are working hard for change in the community. Speaking with there's a roundtable in Racine that gets together every Monday of concerned citizens that work hard to try to make a change in the administration and spread awareness about what the Trump administration is doing. But all of those individuals that I've met with are also connected to other organizations, whether it be the Sierra Club or efforts to improve immigrants' lives. There's just a tremendous amount of activism here and desire to seek change. In terms of what the district needs most, I think access to quality jobs is hugely important. When my dad was working through the late '60s through the '80s, he was at GI Case making tractors down here in Racine before mental illness sidelined him from some of that work. But at the time, Case Tractors employed over 4,000 people in the district, and it's about 10% of that right now. And so that story has been repeated in manufacturing jobs throughout the district. And I think we need to start looking at, and I guess to step back too, it feels like this district has helped grow the nation. Farmers, manufacturers, have a long, proud history here of working to help build up our country, and are now burdened by that legacy of helping to build our country. As a country that, the economy has moved on, and representatives have turned a blind eye to the needs of this district for decades now. And so that's going to be a huge priority of mine, is bringing good paying jobs to this district. And I think hand in hand with that is increasing the level of human capital, and do that through education and reducing the cost of education, making access to technical college, vocational schools more affordable, and also keeping the cost of traditional four-year universities down, so that we have a well-trained core of individuals here in southeastern Wisconsin. Because I believe if given the opportunity, southeastern Wisconsinites can compete with anyone around the world, and we've shown that for literally hundreds of years now.
Okay, final question: differences between you and the opponents on August 11 in the primary?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm very focused on defeating Brian Stile, and he's taken over $500,000 from corporate PACs and special interest groups in this election cycle. And as you said, I've pledged not to take a dime of corporate PACs. And I'll also, I think, highlight my background. I grew up in a low-income family where we struggled, and I knew that doing things like paying the rent, buying a house, totally out of the question, but paying for rent was a constant source of anxiety for my family. And so I have a deep appreciation for what it's like to struggle in this district. Nothing has been handed to me in my life. I've worked hard, been the recipient of, as a child, federal and state efforts to help families, and that help pay for my college as well. I'm a recipient of Pell Grants, and so I'm a firm believer in lifting up the population in southeastern Wisconsin and throughout the country, and have been a direct beneficiary for that. And I've got a history of government service, like we've talked about. Not only did I work in Afghanistan, I worked on efforts to stop harmful Chinese foreign investment and investment from other countries into our country. I've sat face to face with Chinese officials in Beijing and in the United States, negotiating over their laws that discriminated against U.S. businesses. I've sat face to face with Iranian officials again in Europe and also in the United States to hammer out the details of the Iran nuclear agreement. And I think the combination of that, national security expertise, working on some of the most difficult problems that our country faces, and coming from a family, that struggles that has struggled in this district, is representative of a lot of problems that people face, make me the best candidate to win. And so that's what I'm focusing on here.
Roger Polack of Racine is a Democratic candidate in the 1st Congressional District. The primary is August 11th. Roger, thanks so much for talking to WisconsinEye.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.